The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Willow Creek, a subdivision that prided itself on pristine appearances and rigidly enforced rules. Azaleas bloomed in disciplined bursts of color, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung heavy in the humid air. It was the kind of neighborhood where conformity was currency and deviation was met with swift, often passive-aggressive, correction. Overseeing this delicate ecosystem of suburban order was the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and its most vocal, most feared, and most meddlesome board member, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, a woman whose tightly permed blonde hair seemed as unyielding as her opinions, carried herself with an air of perpetual grievance. She saw herself not merely as a resident, but as the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's soul, a role she pursued with the zeal of a prosecutor and the subtlety of a jackhammer. Neighbors whispered the nickname Karen behind cupped hands and hastily closed doors, a label she had earned through countless campaigns against perceived infractions, from incorrectly sorted recycling bins to lawn ornaments deemed aesthetically offensive. Her voice, a sharp, nasal instrument, could often be heard lecturing someone about the precise shade of beige permitted for exterior trim or the maximum allowable height for a backyard fence. She thrived on conflict, seemed energized by confrontation, and possessed an unnerving ability to twist any situation until it validated her own sense of righteousness. Her position on the HOA board wasn't just a title. It was a weapon she wielded with impunity, scrutinizing architectural plans, landscaping choices, and even the social habits of her fellow residents with an intrusiveness that bordered on surveillance. Life in Willow Creek often felt like navigating a minefield laid by Eleanor Vance. Simple pleasures like hosting a barbecue or letting children play loudly in the yard could trigger a formal complaint, delivered with a smug certainty that she was acting in everyone's best interest. Many residents chose quiet compliance over confrontation, learning to keep their lawns immaculate, their trash cans hidden, and their opinions to themselves. But this fragile peace was about to be shattered by the arrival of Sergeant Thomas Wynn. Sergeant Wynn was a man forged in harsher landscapes than Willow Creek. A decorated Army veteran, he had served multiple tours overseas, returning home with scars both visible and unseen. The most visible was the absence of his left leg below the knee, lost to an IED attack years prior. He moved with a slight, almost imperceptible limp, aided by a state-of-the-art carbon fiber prosthetic limb. He was quiet, reserved, seeking only peace and a place to rebuild a semblance of normalcy. He bought a modest ranch house on Poplar Lane, attracted by the neighborhood's apparent tranquility and proximity to the local VA hospital. He spent his days quietly, often working on small projects on his front porch, a space he was slowly adapting to make more accessible. His presence, however, immediately registered on Eleanor Vance's radar. It wasn't his status as a veteran that bothered her, at least not explicitly. It was his difference, his quiet non-compliance with the unwritten code of Willow Creek perfection. His house, while neat, lacked the obsessive grooming Eleanor demanded. His work on the porch, involving occasional drilling or the smell of specialized adhesives used for maintaining his prosthetic or crafting adaptive aids, was deemed disruptive. Eleanor's initial interactions with Sergeant Wynn were cloaked in the faux politeness she reserved for first warnings. She'd appear at his property line, clipboard in hand, pointing out some minor violation, a stray weed near the mailbox, a garden hose not perfectly coiled. "Sergeant Wynn," she'd begin, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "The HOA covenants are quite clear about maintaining a uniform aesthetic. We all have to do our part, you understand." Wynn, a man accustomed to direct orders and clear communication, found Eleanor's passive aggression grating but tried to remain polite. "Yes, ma'am. I'll take care of it," he'd reply, his voice calm but weary. He just wanted to be left alone. He dutifully pulled the weed, coiled the hose, trying to appease the neighborhood watchdog. But appeasement only seemed to embolden Eleanor. Her complaints escalated. The sound of wind sanding a piece of wood for a handrail was excessive noise during quiet hours, even though it was mid-afternoon. The faint, intermittent scent of epoxy resin he sometimes used for minor adjustments or repairs on his prosthetic socket liner, a necessary task for comfort and fit, became a noxious chemical odor that violated environmental standards she seemed to invent on the spot. She filed formal complaints, leveraging her position on the board to send him official-looking letters filled with jargon and threats of fines. Sergeant Wynn, it has come to the attention of the board. One letter began, though everyone knew it originated solely from Eleanor, that activities on your property are generating odors inconsistent with community standards. Specifically, the persistent smell of glue and solvents emanating from your porch area is causing distress to your neighbors. The letter cited vaguely worded bylaws about nuisances and demanded immediate cessation of the offending activity. Wynn felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in his gut. This smell of glue was minimal, infrequent, and absolutely necessary for the upkeep of the very device that allowed him his mobility. He tried explaining this to Eleanor during one of her unsolicited inspections. "Mrs. Vance," he said, trying to keep his tone even, "that smell is from the adhesive I sometimes use for my prosthetic leg. It's essential maintenance. It doesn't last long." Eleanor scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "Prosthetic leg or not, Sergeant, the rules apply to everyone equally. Willow Creek has standards. Perhaps you should conduct your maintenance indoors, or better yet, at a specialized facility. This is a residential area, not an industrial workshop." Her eyes scanned his porch, lingering on the spare prosthetic socket liner sitting innocuously on a small workbench he'd set up. The tension simmered for weeks. Wynn tried to be discreet, working inside whenever possible, but the small tasks were unavoidable. Eleanor, meanwhile, seemed to grow more agitated, her surveillance becoming more overt. She'd park her car down the street, watching his house. She'd walk past slowly, peering onto his porch. Her complaints became more frequent, more irrational. She was fixated, her self-righteousness morphing into obsession. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. Wynn had been experiencing some discomfort with his prosthetics fit, a common issue requiring minor adjustments. He had removed the limb and was sitting on his porch swing, carefully applying a small amount of specialized bonding agent to the socket liner. The carbon fiber leg itself, a sleek, matte black device, leaned against the porch railing nearby, well within the confines of his own property. He needed the adhesive to set for a short while before reattaching the leg. He didn't see Eleanor approach. She moved with a predatory silence when she was on the verge of confrontation. One moment, Wynn was focused on his task. The next, Eleanor Vance was standing on his walkway, hands on her hips, her face contorted in fury. "Sergeant Wynn, I thought I made myself perfectly clear." Her voice sliced through the quiet afternoon air. "That disgusting chemical smell again. I can smell it all the way down the street. It's completely unacceptable." Wynn sighed, looking up tiredly. "Mrs. Vance, I'm almost done. It's a necessary adhesive for my—" "I don't care what it's for," she shrieked, her voice rising. "It violates the rules. This neighborhood will not tolerate noxious odors. I warned you." Before Wynn could react, Eleanor marched directly onto his porch, her eyes fixed on the prosthetic leg leaning against the railing. In her warped perception, this object, this symbol of Wynn's adaptation and resilience, was the source of the offending smell, the root of his defiance against her authority. This thing," she spat, gesturing wildly at the leg. "This is where that awful smell comes from. It's probably leaching chemicals." Wynn started to rise, unbalanced without his leg. "Mrs. Vance, stay off my porch. That's my leg." But Eleanor was beyond reason. Fueled by a toxic blend of arrogance and perceived victimhood, she acted with shocking aggression. She lunged forward, grabbed the lightweight carbon fiber prosthetic, and wrenched it from its place. "No!" Wynn shouted, stumbling as he tried to reach her. Eleanor ignored him. Clutching the prosthetic like a trophy, she stormed off the porch and headed towards the side of his house, where a landscaping crew, hired by the HOA for communal area maintenance, had temporarily left a large, noisy wood chipper running while they took a water break. "Mrs. Vance, what are you doing?" Wynn yelled, hopping desperately on his remaining leg, trying to keep his balance. Horror dawned on his face as he realized her intention. With a triumphant, chillingly self-righteous glare back at Wynn, Eleanor Vance lifted the expensive, custom-fitted prosthetic leg. "This nuisance has to stop," she screamed over the roar of the machine. And then, she fed Sergeant Wynn's prosthetic leg into the gnashing teeth of the wood chipper. The machine sputtered, groaned, and then pulverized the carbon fiber and metal components into a shower of unrecognizable debris. The horrific grinding sound echoed through the otherwise peaceful neighborhood. Wynn stood frozen on his porch, his remaining leg trembling, disbelief and a profound sense of violation washing over him. The landscapers stared, aghast, dropping their water bottles. Eleanor Vance stood beside the chipper, breathing heavily, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She had enforced the rules. She had eliminated the nuisance. She had won. She was entirely unaware, however, of the catastrophic chain of events she had just set in motion. She had no idea that the disabled veteran she had just assaulted and whose vital mobility device she had destroyed had a brother named Marcus Wynn, a brother who happened to be the Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The immediate aftermath was a blur of shocked silence followed by hesitant outrage. The landscaping crew, mouths agape, shut down the chipper, the sudden quiet emphasizing the horrific nature of what had just occurred. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion and Eleanor's earlier shouting, peered from behind curtains or crept cautiously onto their own porches. Sergeant Wynn, leaning heavily against his porch railing for support, simply stared at the pile of shredded composite material spewing from the chipper's chute. The physical loss was immense. The prosthetic was worth tens of thousands of dollars and was intricately tailored to his body, but the psychological blow was deeper. It was a violation, a deliberate destruction of a part of him, carried out with smug impunity. Eleanor, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of her actions, or perhaps reveling in it, brushed dust from her hands. "Well," she announced to the stunned landscapers, "at least that smell will be gone now. You can clean this mess up." She turned, gave one a final, dismissive glance, and strode back towards her own immaculate home, as if she had just finished weeding a flower bed. When eventually managed to hop back inside his house, his mind reeling, he sank onto a chair, the phantom sensation of his missing limb more acute than ever. He felt exposed, helpless, and deeply angry. Years of learning to navigate the world with his disability, years of maintaining his independence, felt undermined in a single, violent act of neighborhood tyranny. After composing himself, he made a phone call. Not to the local police. He suspected Eleanor's HOA influence might muddy those waters initially, but to his older brother, Marcus. Marcus Wynn was in Washington, D.C., immersed in the complex bureaucracy of the VA, specifically the Office of the Inspector General, OIG. His job was to root out waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement within the vast system designed to support veterans. He dealt with multi-million-dollar contract frauds, systemic failures in healthcare delivery, and criminal investigations into exploitation of veterans. He was known for his meticulous approach, his calm demeanor, and his unwavering commitment to protecting veterans' interests. When his personal cell phone rang, and he saw it was Thomas, he answered immediately, a slight crease of concern forming on his brow. His brother rarely called during work hours unless it was important. "Tom, everything all right?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. The story spilled out, haltingly at first, then with growing anger and disbelief in Tom's voice. Marcus listened in stunned silence, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. He heard about Eleanor Vance, the HOA, the escalating harassment, the absurd complaints about the smell of glue, and finally, the horrifying climax with the wood chipper. Each detail painted a picture not just of a neighborhood dispute, but of targeted abuse against a disabled veteran, culminating in the destruction of essential medical equipment. She fed it into a wood chipper, Marcus. Tom finally choked out, the raw pain evident in his voice. "My leg." A cold, controlled fury settled over Marcus Wynn. This wasn't just an attack on his brother. It was an attack on a veteran, a blatant disregard for his service, his disability, and his basic human dignity. And the perpetrator was leveraging an HOA position to do it. "Stay put, Tom," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "Don't engage with her further. Lock your doors. I'm on my way." Within hours, Marcus had arranged emergency leave, booked the first available flight, and was en route to Willow Creek. He wasn't arriving just as a concerned brother. He was arriving with the full weight of his office potentially behind him. While the OIG's primary jurisdiction was within the VA system and its contractors, the targeted nature of the attack on a veteran, the destruction of VA-provided or funded medical equipment. Prosthetics often fall into this category, and the potential misuse of community structures like an HOA to facilitate such abuse created avenues for investigation that Eleanor Vance could never have anticipated. He arrived late that night, finding Tom shaken but resolute. The sight of his brother, usually so self-reliant, needing to use crutches he hadn't relied on regularly for years, solidified Marcus's resolve. The first step was securing evidence. The landscaping crew, horrified by what they'd witnessed and fearing repercussions if they were implicated in covering it up, had bagged the shredded remains from the chipper as best they could. Marcus took photographs, documented the scene, and spoke calmly with Tom, getting every detail of the preceding weeks of harassment. He also made discreet inquiries with a couple of neighbors who had witnessed the event, confirming Tom's account and noting their palpable fear of Eleanor. The next morning, Marcus Wynn, dressed in a crisp suit that spoke of quiet authority, paid a visit to the Willow Creek HOA office, a small, unassuming room attached to the community clubhouse. Eleanor Vance was there, presiding over some paperwork, looking entirely unperturbed. She glanced up, offering a tight, dismissive smile that faltered slightly when Marcus introduced himself. "Good morning. I'm Marcus Wynn. I believe you met my brother, Sergeant Thomas Wynn, yesterday." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Recognition flickered, followed by a renewed wave of self-assurance. "Ah, yes. Sergeant Wynn. An unfortunate incident. Necessary, I'm afraid. Rules are rules." She gestured vaguely towards a stack of papers. "Now, if you'll excuse me, HOA business. I'm not here about yesterday's incident, Mrs. Vance." "Not directly," Marcus interrupted smoothly, though his calm tone did little to hide the steel beneath. "I'm here in my official capacity as the Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs." He presented his credentials. The effect was immediate. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Her carefully constructed composure fractured. "Inspector General? VA? What did the federal government have to do with HOA rules and a smelly prosthetic?" "Inspector General?" she stammered, her voice losing its sharp edge. I don't understand. This is about neighborhood regulations. Bylaws. My office investigates matters affecting veterans, Mrs. Vance," Marcus stated evenly. "That includes potential fraud, abuse, or mismanagement of resources intended for them. We received information suggesting irregularities that warrant a closer look at this HOA's operations, particularly concerning funds potentially earmarked for or donated towards veteran support initiatives within this community." This was a strategic move. While the prosthetics destruction was the catalyst, Marcus suspected Eleanor's behavior might be a symptom of a larger pattern of misconduct. People who acted with such brazen entitlement in one area often displayed it in others, especially where money and control were involved. And HOAs, with their often opaque financial structures and volunteer boards, could be vulnerable to mismanagement or outright theft. He had already done a preliminary check. Willow Creek occasionally held community drives or events that solicited donations, sometimes mentioning local veterans' causes. Eleanor gaped at him. "Veteran funds? We don't have specific veteran funds. We're just a homeowners association. Perhaps not specific segregated funds," Marcus conceded, maintaining eye contact. "But we have reason to believe donations solicited under the guise of supporting veterans may not have been properly accounted for or utilized. Therefore, pursuant to federal oversight responsibilities related to potential fraud impacting veterans or VA resources, I am requesting full access to the Willow Creek HOA financial records for the past 7 years. Books, ledgers, bank statements, meeting minutes detailing financial decisions, donation records, everything." He produced a formal, though preliminary, request document. It wasn't a subpoena yet, but it carried significant weight, especially coming from a federal OIG. Refusal would escalate matters considerably. Eleanor looked trapped. Her mind raced, trying to process the implications. Financial records? Veteran donations? She had run the HOA's informal community chest fund for years, handling the small cash donations collected during holiday events or summer picnics, often mentioning supporting local heroes as a way to encourage contributions. It was mostly small amounts, easily skimmed, easily hidden in vague ledger entries like community beautification or clubhouse supplies. No one had ever questioned it. No one had ever dared. Until now. The destruction of the prosthetic, a seemingly isolated act of personal vengeance against a non-compliant resident, had inadvertently opened a Pandora's box she had kept carefully sealed for years. The Inspector General wasn't just here about a broken leg. He was here about the money. And Eleanor Vance suddenly had a lot more to worry about than the smell of glue. The request for financial records sent ripples of panic through Eleanor Vance. She tried to stall, citing bylaws about board approval, privacy concerns, the need for legal consultation. But Marcus Wynn was patient and persistent, his calm demeanor making his implied authority even more intimidating. He made it clear that noncompliance would result in formal subpoenas and a potentially wider, more disruptive federal investigation. Faced with this unwavering pressure, and perhaps realizing the optics of refusing an inspector general investigating potential harm to veterans, the other, mostly passive HOA board members reluctantly agreed to grant access. Marcus didn't conduct the audit himself. He brought in a team of forensic accountants from the VA OIG, specialists trained to dissect financial records and uncover hidden discrepancies. They set up shop in the small HOA office, transforming the clubhouse annex into a temporary federal workspace. The arrival of serious-looking individuals in suits, carrying briefcases and laptops, did not go unnoticed in Willow Creek. Whispers escalated, and nervous glances were exchanged over property lines. Eleanor tried to maintain her usual facade, patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard, but her steps lacked their usual confident click, and her pronouncements about lawn maintenance seemed brittle. The accountants began their meticulous work, starting with the most recent years and working backward. They requested bank statements directly from the financial institutions, cross-referencing them with the HOA's internal ledgers, spreadsheets, and handwritten notes that constituted their bookkeeping system. It quickly became apparent that the HOA's financial management under Eleanor's de facto control was sloppy at best, deliberately obscure at worst. Particular attention was paid to the community chest fund Eleanor managed. Records were patchy. Cash donations collected at events were often recorded simply as lump sums, with no itemized tracking. Expenditures listed were vague: event supplies, landscaping enhancements, administrative costs. There were receipts missing, invoices that seemed inflated, and checks written for cash with minimal notation. One of the junior accountants flagged a recurring pattern. Several times a year, typically after community fundraising events where supporting local veterans was mentioned as a possible beneficiary, lump sums would be withdrawn from the community chest account or checks written to Eleanor herself, often categorized as reimbursements for unspecified purchases. The amounts weren't huge individually, a few $100s here, maybe $1,000 there, but they added up over the 7-year period under review. Simultaneously, Marcus was doing his own legwork. He discreetly interviewed other veterans living in Willow Creek and surrounding areas. Had they ever received support from the HOA? Had they been aware of specific fundraising efforts supposedly directed towards them? The answers were consistently negative. While residents recalled Eleanor mentioning supporting our heroes during donation drives, no veteran could recall receiving any direct assistance, grants, or even formal acknowledgement funded by the HOA. He also cross-referenced the dates of Eleanor's suspicious withdrawals with her personal activities. Credit card statements, obtained through appropriate legal channels as the investigation deepened and probable cause emerged, showed expenditures that correlated suspiciously with the cash withdrawals, high-end store purchases, spa treatments, weekend getaways. It seemed that community beautification Eleanor was funding was often her own. The accountants uncovered donation slips from specific events where residents had earmarked contributions for veterans' assistance. These specific funds, totaling several $1,000s over the years, seemed to have vanished entirely, absorbed into the general slush of the community chest before being withdrawn or spent on unrelated items. The picture emerging was one of chronic, low-level embezzlement masked by poor record-keeping and Eleanor's domineering control over the HOA's finances. She hadn't stolen a massive sum in one go. Instead, she had steadily siphoned off funds, particularly those given with charitable intent towards veterans, exploiting the community's goodwill and her position of trust for personal gain. The total amount misappropriated over 7 years was estimated to be close to $60,000. Money given by residents who thought they were helping local heroes, but which instead funded Eleanor Vance's lifestyle and sense of entitlement. While the financial investigation unfolded, the immediate issue of Tom's destroyed prosthetic also moved forward. Marcus helped his brother file a comprehensive police report detailing the assault and destruction of property. He also contacted the VA's prosthetic services. Given the circumstances and Marcus's position, Tom's case was expedited. He was measured for a new, even more advanced prosthetic, the cost of which the VA would cover, though Marcus made it clear they would seek full restitution from Eleanor. The incident report also triggered a VA internal review regarding interactions between veterans and HOAs, particularly concerning necessary medical equipment and accessibility modifications. Eleanor, meanwhile, grew increasingly erratic. Her attempts to project authority in the neighborhood became desperate. She issued violation notices for minuscule infractions, her handwriting tight with anxiety. She tried to rally support among the other board members, portraying Marcus's investigation as a federal overreach, an attack on their community autonomy. But her support was crumbling. The other board members, now aware of the financial scrutiny and fearing legal exposure themselves, began distancing themselves from her. Residents who had long chafed under her rule felt emboldened by the OIG's presence, sharing their own stories of her bullying and overreach with Marcus's team. The forensic accountants finally completed their report. It laid out, in meticulous detail, the pattern of embezzlement, the missing funds, the falsified records, and the direct correlation between HOA fund withdrawals and Eleanor's personal spending. The evidence was damning. They had traced the flow of money, documented the lack of oversight, and established a clear case of fraud and theft, specifically targeting funds solicited in the name of veterans. Marcus reviewed the report carefully. The financial crimes were serious, carrying potential federal charges due to the interstate nature of banking and the involvement of funds related to veterans' affairs. Added to this were the state-level charges Tom was pursuing regarding the assault and destruction of his prosthetic leg. The net was closing tightly around Eleanor Vance. Marcus arranged a final meeting. Not in the HOA office this time, but in a neutral conference room at a nearby federal building. He requested Eleanor Vance attend, along with her lawyer, if she had one. He also invited the other HOA board members, making it clear this was about the findings of the OG investigation. Eleanor arrived, looking pale and drawn, accompanied by a flustered-looking local attorney she had hastily retained. The other board members sat rigidly, avoiding eye contact with her. Marcus, flanked by the lead forensic accountant and a VA legal counsel, sat opposite them. "Thank you for coming," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "Over the past few weeks, my office has conducted a thorough review of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association's financial records, prompted by concerns regarding the potential mismanagement of funds, particularly those solicited for veteran support." He didn't mention the prosthetic leg initially. He focused entirely on the money. The accountant presented a summary of the findings, displaying charts and highlighted bank statements on a monitor. They detailed the missing donations, the unexplained cash withdrawals, the falsified expense reports, the personal expenditures masked as HOA business. Eleanor's lawyer occasionally interjected with weak objections about bookkeeping errors or misunderstandings, but the sheer volume of evidence, meticulously documented, was overwhelming. The other board members listened in horrified silence, realizing the extent of the deception that had occurred under their noses, facilitated by their own passive acceptance of Eleanor's control. "The investigation concludes," Marcus stated, looking directly at Eleanor, "that over a period of 7 years, approximately $60,000, much of it donated by residents under the impression it would support local veterans, was systematically misappropriated by Mrs. Vance for personal use." Eleanor gasped, clutching at her chest. "That's a lie. It's accounting mistakes. Misunderstandings. We have bank records, Mrs. Vance," Marcus said quietly. "We have credit card statements. We have testimony from vendors confirming inflated invoices. We have evidence of cash withdrawals immediately preceding personal travel and luxury purchases. The pattern is undeniable and constitutes significant financial fraud." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle in the silent room. "This conduct is particularly egregious given that it exploited the goodwill of this community and specifically targeted funds intended for those who have served our country." Then he shifted focus. "Separately, but related in demonstrating a pattern of abuse of authority and disregard for the well-being of a veteran, is the incident involving my brother, Sergeant Thomas Wynn. He briefly recounted the harassment campaign culminating in the destruction of the prosthetic leg. This act of violence and destruction of essential medical equipment is being handled through state criminal charges. However, it was this act that brought Mrs. Vance's broader conduct to our attention. He looked around the table. The Office of the Inspector General will be referring its findings regarding the financial irregularities to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential federal prosecution on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. We will also cooperate fully with state authorities regarding the charges of assault and destruction of property filed by Sergeant Wynn. The room was deathly quiet. Eleanor seemed to shrink in her chair, her face ashen. Her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear. The other board members looked stunned, realizing the legal jeopardy Eleanor, and potentially the HOA itself, was now facing. Marcus wasn't finished. Furthermore, he added, his voice hardening slightly, given Mrs. Vance's documented actions demonstrating hostility towards a disabled veteran and misappropriation of funds intended for veteran support. The Department of Veterans Affairs will be taking administrative action. Effective immediately, Eleanor Vance will be formally barred from entering any VA facility nationwide. She will also be permanently blacklisted from receiving any VA benefits or participating in any programs funded or administered by the VA. We will also be pursuing civil action to recover the misappropriated funds, plus damages and penalties. The finality of his words hung in the air. Blacklisted. Barred. Federal prosecution. State charges. Civil suits. The structure of Eleanor Vance's carefully controlled world had not just cracked, it had imploded. Her reign of petty tyranny in Willow Creek, fueled by arrogance and culminating in a shocking act of violence, had led her to this moment, facing the full force of federal and state legal systems, stripped of her power, and exposed as a common thief who preyed on the generosity meant for heroes. The smug satisfaction she felt standing by the wood chipper had evaporated, replaced by the cold dread of imminent justice. The fallout was swift and devastating for Eleanor Vance. The U.S. Attorney's Office, presented with the OG's meticulously compiled evidence, quickly moved forward with federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. Simultaneously, the local district attorney pursued the state charges of felony destruction of property due to the high value of the prosthetic and assault against Sergeant Wynn. Faced with overwhelming evidence on multiple fronts and advised by her lawyer that a trial would be disastrous, Eleanor eventually accepted a plea agreement. The agreement involved pleading guilty to both federal embezzlement charges and the state charge of felony destruction of property. The assault charge was held in abeyance pending successful completion of probation terms after her sentence, a small mercy in the face of crushing consequences. The federal judge, citing the egregious breach of trust and the specific targeting of funds meant for veterans, sentenced Eleanor to 36 months in federal prison. The state judge added a concurrent sentence and 5 years of probation upon release, including mandatory anger management counseling and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Sergeant Wynn or his property. But the punishment didn't end with prison time. Marcus Wynn and the VA's legal team pursued the civil recovery action vigorously. The court readily granted a judgment against Eleanor for the full $60,000 she had embezzled, plus significant penalties and interest, bringing the total amount owed closer to $90,000. To satisfy this judgment, the process of asset forfeiture began. Investigators traced the embezzled funds through Eleanor's accounts, identifying assets purchased or maintained during the period of her theft. Her meticulously maintained home in Willow Creek, ironically the symbol of the very conformity she weaponized, was found to have been partially sustained by the stolen money, property taxes paid, expensive landscaping funded, renovations completed. Other assets, including savings accounts, a late-model SUV, and investments, were also linked to the illicit income stream. The legal battle over forfeiture was brief. Eleanor's attempts to shield her assets were futile against the clear evidence trail. The court ordered the seizure and sale of enough of her assets to cover the full judgment owed to the VA for restitution. Her prized home in Willow Creek, the epicenter of her reign, was put up for auction. The proceeds, along with liquidated savings and the sale of her vehicle, were transferred to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Marcus Wynn, however, had a specific plan for these recovered funds. He didn't want the money simply absorbed back into the VA's general budget. He wanted it to directly counteract the harm Eleanor had caused and create something positive from the wreckage of her actions. Working through official VA channels and liaising with prosthetic services, he directed the entire recovered sum, nearly $90,000, towards a special fund dedicated to providing high-quality prosthetic limbs for veterans facing financial hardship or bureaucratic delays. The impact was significant. The recovered funds were sufficient to cover the cost of approximately 50 modern, custom-fitted prosthetic legs for veterans in need across the region. The story, once localized to the shocked whispers of Willow Creek, gained wider, positive attention. News outlets reported on the Willow Creek Restitution Fund, highlighting how the ill-gotten gains of an HOA tyrant were being transformed into mobility and independence for disabled heroes. Sergeant Wynn, now comfortably using his new, state-of-the-art prosthetic provided swiftly by the VA, became an unassuming symbol of resilience. He spoke quietly but powerfully about the importance of community support for veterans and the need for accountability when that trust is broken. Within Willow Creek, the atmosphere changed dramatically. With Eleanor gone, first entangled in legal battles, then incarcerated, a palpable sense of relief settled over the neighborhood. The HOA board underwent a complete overhaul. New members, genuinely interested in community well-being rather than personal power, were elected. They implemented transparent financial practices, established clear guidelines for handling donations, and fostered a more inclusive, less punitive environment. The oppressive scrutiny lifted, neighbors began interacting more freely, and the rigid conformity Eleanor had enforced started to soften around the edges. People still kept their lawns neat, but the fear of instant reprisal for a misplaced garden gnome was gone. Sergeant Wynn found the peace he had originally sought in Willow Creek. His neighbors, no longer intimidated by Eleanor, offered genuine friendship and support. They brought over meals, helped with yard work he couldn't easily manage, and simply treated him as a valued member of the community, not a problem to be regulated. His porch became a quiet haven again, where he could work on his projects without fear of harassment. The faint smell of epoxy resin, when it occasionally drifted on the air, was no longer a source of contention but a subtle reminder of resilience and the quiet work of maintaining independence. Eleanor Vance served her time in a low-security federal correctional facility. Upon release, stripped of her assets, reputation shattered, and permanently barred from the neighborhood she once dominated, she faded into obscurity. The restraining order prevented her from ever returning to Willow Creek, and the blacklisting ensured she could never again access VA resources or facilities. Her name became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how arrogance, entitlement, and the abuse of petty power could lead to utter ruin. The final chapter of the story belonged not to Eleanor's downfall, but to the positive outcome her crimes inadvertently generated. Marcus Wynn occasionally received updates from the VA prosthetic service. Another veteran fitted with a leg funded by the Restitution. Another life changed. 50 times over, Eleanor's greed and cruelty were transmuted into acts of restorative justice. Sergeant Wynn, walking comfortably through the now peaceful streets of Willow Creek on his carbon fiber limb, knew that while the scars remained, both his own and the community's, healing was possible. Justice, though slow and hard-won, had ultimately prevailed, leaving behind not just the memory of a neighborhood tyrant, but a legacy of 50 restored steps for those who had sacrificed so much. The sun set over Willow Creek, no longer casting shadows of fear, but illuminating a community slowly learning to value its residents more than its rules.